In the early days of the internet, YouTubers and movies were like water and oil. They never mixed, only making you feel wet and greasy after making contact. It's needless to say that for the first 2 decades of the platform, YouTube's most popular creators did not have an eye for cinematic flair. Things like the Fred trilogy and The Angry Video Game Nerd, the movie, received big budgets beyond what the creators could handle, putting them in an environment where they had to command a lot of people, collaborate, and somehow keep their distinct creative voice intact in a larger scope. These movies always crumbled under expectations. Looking back at that era of content creators attempting to be film stars, it's easy to see how they've become as widely mocked as they are now, just for how incredible those follies are. However, in that same era, we could see people using the platform to upload short films as a cool proof of concept. You can see this in directors like David F. Sandberg, whose short film, Lights Out, garnered an audience on YouTube and took that short and made a feature-length version of it, launching his career in Hollywood with just a handful of uploads. There are probably countless examples of people doing this. People choosing to get their start in the digital space and transferring it into the cinematic one. Now, we even get to see that with people who don't directly get their name from the genre of film they're making. These films garner a wide appeal, not just for the wow factor of the name like they did back then. No, we are seeing a generation of online content creators entering mainstream cinema. I'm going to be talking about the 2 biggest examples we have seen yet of the content creator turned filmmaker. Both movies are recent box office successes. Despite sharing a similar origin, these films have very distinct differences, and I thought it would be an interesting setup to frame them together. In those differences, we see what online creators can bring to the table when it comes to movies, and where they can fall flat. Enough cock teasing, you know the title, you clicked on it, you should know at this point what I'm talking about. Backrooms, directed by Kane Parsons, and Obsession, directed by Curry Barker. Enough talk. Let's get into it. To start, I feel like it's necessary for me to mention the way both directors reached to this point. It helped shape their films, so it's a no-brainer to talk about it at least a little bit. You might think it's a little reductive considering the actual size of these content creators, but for me, I didn't know a whole lot about either of these guys going in. I mean, I knew of the Backrooms and I knew of Curry Barker. I think I saw one of his short comedy skits before, but I feel like it's necessary to fill in the blanks. I only had a vague awareness of what the Backrooms actually was. I didn't even know there was a name attached to it. That was until the movie was announced. Maybe my brain hasn't decayed enough to experience the extensive brain-rotten lore that went into the Backrooms, or the rock I lived under had Wi-Fi that blocked it out for me, but I seriously did not think the Backrooms was as big of a online phenom as it turned out to be. To the extent of my knowledge going in, the Backrooms was a liminal space. That's it. That's all I knew. Liminal spaces are outdated 20th century indoor environments that appear eerily well preserved. In Backrooms, this takes place in an office space, often devoid of living things and filled with furniture arranged in unusual ways. Sometimes these arrangements distort physical space. However, as we see in the shorts Kane made, and the endless games that spawned from these videos, somehow, there's always something lurking around you in that distorted realm. In this film, he tries to flesh it out, which leads to many of the issues that I will touch on later. For Obsession, Curry Barker did not have the same world to work with. He didn't even get a start working in the horror genre. He started with sketch comedy on a channel called That's a Bad Idea, with sketches being consistently uploaded as far back as 2017. Oh god, 2017 was 9 years ago. Oh god. Yet as time progresses, Barker would slip in some short films here and there on the same channel, signaling his aptitude as a horror director, with it finally coming together in his debut feature, Obsession. What is most impressive about both of these films is how they look. On the surface, you can tell the directors know their way around a camera. With Obsession, knowing how to place its actors in a way that makes them feel present and oftentimes shrouded in darkness. Especially with Nikki. My god. Many scenes with her just lurking in the shadows or just in the background of a scene got under my skin more than the rushes of violence that occur in the film. In Backrooms, the shot compositions have incredible depth to them and give a strange, vast feeling off, which leads me to my first problem I had with Backrooms. Despite being well composed, they never evoked anything in me. I was hardly scared when the film was using traditional cameras, but when they had handheld cameras for a few sequences, that's when the film shined and actually had tension. I think to better illustrate what I'm talking about here, I'm gonna reference something Kane Pixels himself is a fan of. Video games. No, not that kind. Aww. Recently, I played the Resident Evil 2 remake, and I enjoyed my experience, but something was missing from the game. Often, I just didn't feel tension, and I reached a point mid-game where most of the zombies were just nuisances rather than threats. Even with the addition of the Lickers and Mr. X, that problem hardly improved. Backrooms suffers from the same problem. Once you get used to that weird environment, you just accept it. It's so open, and the monsters that lurk inside are so far from our main characters that the tension isn't there. You could say that the odd environment is more than capable of giving scares, and it's not about seeing the monsters but being aware of their presence. Yet, in my viewing, I just didn't get anything from it. Except for the handheld camera sequences I mentioned earlier. They captured so much adrenaline from exploring an unknown environment at a fast pace that they were probably my favorite sequences in the film. Maybe this camera work just needs to feel smaller, and within the Backrooms, maybe it just needed to focus on smaller corridors or using those wide shots and then kind of locking into a certain point in them to make you feel something, but it just needed to feel smaller. The Backrooms just felt so big and empty that the smaller corridors and the closer, more unusual turns that were needed just weren't there for it to feel tense as they explore. I'd say it's competent visually, but I was often less scared and more intrigued with where it was going. That might have been the point. Maybe I'm just being pedantic here, but I feel the exploration would have been better if it paid off with where it was going. Obsession, on the other hand, is visually great. However, I'm not gonna let it get away cleanly without snapping a ruler in its direction. Comparison is the thief of joy, and worse yet for this review, comparison stole an unbiased perspective. So I guess I have to mention Obsession's heavy debt to one of my favorite horror movies by one of my goats, Pulse, directed by Kiyoshi Kurosawa. There are scenes in here directly paying homage to it, and the dreary figures lurking in the shadows, doing justice to that unwavering dread you get from having a figure slowly coming at you without pause, or a real-life human being sitting in the shadows with a state of uncertainty. I love this style of horror, the kind where you just feel stuck with something you can't shake. And while I wouldn't say Pulse has the scariest scene ever, as some clickbait might have it, I'm glad the movie and its director are finally getting flowers in the 2020s. Obsession loses me with those homages at times. Specifically, once Nikki starts making swift movements across the screen, and the music just booms at you while she's doing that. Where it gets me back with those scenes is the acting. The performance of Nikki by Inde Navarra is incredible. Besides her ability to contort in those scenes, she also just knows how to command everyone in the room, even when she's out of focus. Her ability to explode at any moment puts you on edge throughout the whole film. Even when she's not on screen, it always feels like she could pop up. There's just so much emotion in the performance as well. So intense are the swings in her mood that they could shatter glass if placed next to a window. With those emotional impulses, she also manages to capture moments of clarity when whatever is possessing her loosens its grip, only to snap back into mania striking fear into the audience when it happens. The other actors do just fine, probably more than fine, but nothing compared to Nikki's performance. Obsession centers on Nikki for a reason, and her relationship with Bear sets Bear up as a voice of reason to try and play the straight man in this whole bizarre situation. Granted, he's a very flawed voice of reason. A very, very, very flawed voice at that. We look at him as the everyman. Whether the audience is sympathetic towards it is up to the individual here. He's just our avenue of experiencing supernatural. Bear is just our desperate, doughy-eyed avenue we turn into to see it all. When Nikki gets possessed, we end up gravitating towards Bear. Backrooms, on the other hand, has acting. It's fine. A few moments stick out to me as a piece of great performance, but it's not a film built around performance. More so, it's more built around the way that the actors interact with their environment, with the backrooms as a location. The imagery here, the world they inhabit, is brought to life, and that ultimately should suffice for a film that is so focused on exploration, internal and external. The biggest compliment I can give Kane in regards to that exploration is in the film's sound. He gives the backrooms space to feel eerie. And then, at moments of necessity, ambience creeps into the mix. I really like the sound design here. It's my favorite aspect of Backrooms' filmmaking. He knows how to set the stage for this environment, even when he doesn't always know how to shoot it. The soundtrack reminds me a lot of the haunting ambience you could see in artists like Tim Hecker, One of Tricks Point Never, or Boards of Canada. A bit more straightforward than those artists, but he still goes for that uncanny nostalgia that those artists do and puts it into this film as perfect background noise. And somehow, Parsons got Boards of Canada to give them a song for the outro of the film. I don't know if this is right, but if this means that he somehow played a hand in them releasing music this year, I applaud him for that. Kane, you beautiful bastard, at least you did one thing right. The soundtrack is the best part of Backrooms. It's deliberately sprinkled throughout the film. It adds more to the atmosphere than the filmmaking does. So bravo for that. For Obsession, I don't think I can shower it with the same compliments here. This is that one aspect of the film I'm going to have to rain on everyone's parade about. The use of music here kinda sucks. At times, it took me out because of how much it was trying to drag me in. When Nikki would come onto the screen abruptly, there would be an accompanying jump in the music, and at times, it annoyed me. Not enough to destroy the scene, but enough to make me wince at the cliche in that moment. There are a couple of moments that I think the music is well placed, and even add layers of irony to the scenes, like the ending scene, but it certainly has an interesting choice in song to use. Overall, I think it's the weakest part of the film. It ruins some of what makes Obsession special to me, but I can't help my nitpicking. This is a movie review on YouTube. If I wasn't nitpicking something insignificant, then I wouldn't be a good YouTube movie critic, right? Lastly, I want to touch on the story, as it is probably the biggest disparity I have between these two films. Obsession is pretty straightforward, and Backrooms is very oblique with its storyline. The plotline is pretty easy to understand in Backrooms. It follows a furniture store owner who discovers a portal to another world in the basement of his store. But where it loses most people is with the imagery and the flashbacks that come throughout the film, as well as the final scene of the movie, which I feel makes the experience wholly dissatisfying, creating more questions when I wasn't asking for more. Obsession, on the other hand, is about a guy named Baron, nicknamed Bear, who has a crush on a girl named Nikki. To actualize his love, he resorts to gimmicky knickknack he finds inside a wellness store. The wish he makes with it seems to come true, and Nikki loves him more than anything in the world. Literally, anything in the world. She becomes obsessed with him, no pun intended, and acts erratically throughout the film, all while Bear struggles to deal with the situation. I do love the story for this. A fairly simple premise, taken in a very nuanced direction. It's done with such nuance and just the right amount of stupidity to keep the plot going. I can't really talk about without going into spoilers, but without getting into any details, Obsession makes a relationship drama a horrifying experience. And now is the point where I'm going to say, if you don't want spoilers for either film, skip to the timestamp. You know, I wouldn't have really covered spoilers for this, but Backrooms kind of left me so confused. I needed to articulate my feelings, especially with the way that Backrooms ended. The realm our characters explore, to put my spin on Backrooms, it is a realm our characters use to explore the fracturing of memories that our main character Clark has, with them mutating in this crystallized form. We see that alongside flashbacks from another character named Mary cutting into the story from time to time. However, near the end of the film, Clark's past consumes him, mentally and physically. He gets eaten by a giant pirate, okay? That pirate ends up chasing Mary through the backrooms, all of which are themed around symbols that plague Clark's life. Up until that point, it all makes sense. I get it. That is, until she is saved by some research group that is also looking into the backrooms, which may or may not have some significance to the backrooms lore, but if you want any analysis of that, you're barking up the wrong tree here. The final scene is what I'm here to discuss. See, the final scene is her being interrogated by that research group. The scene begins to fade out, leaving us with images fracturing. Descending, we see these images become increasingly contorted until they fully return to the backrooms. Descending into that same room, fracturing further until those images become increasingly contorted, and then we finally arrive back at the backrooms. I'm gonna say that's an okay kind of idea to end this movie on, but the more I thought about it, the more nonplussed I became. It kind of just fizzles out in a way that only makes sense if they were trying to set up a sequel. And apparently, a sequel is in the works, so I guess it worked. Hooray. When it comes to Obsession, on the other hand, I could not stop thinking about it after I watched it. It's an interesting relationship study. Like I said before, the simple premise leads to such a nuanced situation where one character is manipulated into falling head over heels with their significant other. The significant other doesn't know how to brace for impact. I feel like there's so much to say about this dynamic as it plays out. Bear knows that something is wrong with Nikki, and despite being on the fence about whether the One Wish Willow actually works, he tells no one that he did this or that there's something very wrong. I mean, he tries to do that, but he never clearly conveys his feelings to anyone close to him. Why? Throughout the film, Bear desperately clings to this idea that he can make this work, and he's like, this is totally fine. Despite all the red flags that pop up in every fucking scene, this is totally fine. He just can't let go of that relationship, even in its toxic form. Bear's desperation, no, Bear's obsession with making it work, makes him refuse any action that could make this better. At the same time, it also seems like he's afraid that something might happen if he tries to get help, like if he can't get that to work, right? He doesn't want to lose her, yet the person he loves is not present. It becomes harder to deny that as the film progresses. I think this just goes to show how flawed a relationship can get when it's built on something this faulty. Clearly, before the Willow was used, Nikki had feelings for Bear, or at least some romantic interest. Yet when the One Wish Willow is used, it turns her into someone she's not, and Bear does not recognize that. Actually, he does recognize that, but he still is like, this is fine, I want this relationship. He prefers the relationship over her being herself. Bear acts all the same, just like everything was as normal. This culminates in a very bitter sting in the end, with everyone but Nikki dead. Curry Barker delivers that conclusion with shock and a hint of black comedy. The kind that makes Obsession so fascinating to watch. To end this video, I want to bring up a post from one of my favorite New Hollywood old farts turned Facebook boomer, Paul Schrader. In a post from a few years ago, talking about the films of Ty West, he poses the question, why so many competent directors work in horror than any other genre today? He phrased it a lot harsher than I did just now in that post. You can read it right now. But his point is an interesting one. In my opinion, as a film dork who loves going to the movies, I see this as a fault of the studios. Because studios that don't specialize in a genre like horror aren't as willing to take a risk. The fans of horror are more willing to accept bizarre turns and creative directions, especially when you compare it to a typical moviegoer. They know what they're going into, or at least they have this openness for unexpected turns, like what happens with films. So studios like Blumhouse are more willing to give something outlandish a chance. It may fail, but at least it'll be a morbid curiosity and could develop a following years after. The unique angles that both Obsession and Backrooms take are proof of that. It just goes to show the new avenues that filmmakers can emerge from and how that can play into them being a stronger director. It allows for them to come from something other than film school or just well-placed connections, like the past has continually showed. With the almighty power of the internet, the floodgates of success have opened up for anyone. Not only that, but these films prove that they can dominate the box office and stand tall against industry giants. As per my recommendations, I'd recommend both of these movies, although my recommendations for Backrooms is a bit more mild. It's a decent film, but it feels like a mind-bending puzzle with pieces that may or may not be missing. It's a type of film that'll only leave you in a mild state of confusion, and I don't know if that's your type of thing, but if that is, that's your film. Obsession, on the other hand, is a strong contender for my film of the year. I mean, it's not my favorite film of the year so far, but it's up there right now. It's been a slow start for the year so far, but this easily stands at the top. If Backrooms feels like an incomplete puzzle, Obsession feels like a first date that starts with lust and ends it with the restraining order. I guess that's how life goes, you know? One moment you're trapped in an endlessly banal corporate hellscape, the next you're being fed your own dead cat by the woman you forced a relationship on. Well, good luck!